Sometimes I feel like the best parts of video games can also be the most difficult to describe. It's the feeling you get when entering a new area for the first time, when you stop to appreciate every small detail in the environment around you. Atmosphere is kind of a vague word, but it's the only one that can cover the infinite possibilities of this medium. Every video game has some level of atmosphere, but of course there are those special games that really focus on it and put it at the forefront. There are countless examples of truly incredible video game atmospheres, from Dark Souls to Stardew Valley. But today I'm going to be focusing on Nintendo games specifically, as I believe these games have some of the best atmospheres in all of gaming. I'll be going over some of my personal favorites and try my best to capture the magic of these games that can really only be experienced firsthand. So let's talk about the power of atmosphere in Nintendo games. Two of the biggest types of atmosphere are the creepy and the cozy. Let's start with the former. Scary and unsettling ambience can be intimidating, raising the stakes of the situation and heightening all your senses. It can be limited to just one area, or be the structure of the entire game like in Majora's Mask. This whole game has a heavy atmosphere of dread, with the moon always looming over you reminding you of the inevitable. Living the same 3 days over and over again trying to find a way out of the apocalypse is a pretty intense setup, but the really heavy parts are the way the characters in the world react to it all. A brave warrior cowers in the corner, an older sister tries her best to distract her younger sibling, and others desperately try to find a way to survive. The final hours before the end have a truly apocalyptic atmosphere, with the sound of the clock tower piercing through the dark music as the earth rumbles. The Legend of Zelda series has plenty of great examples of dark atmosphere I could cover, but none of them hit quite as hard as Majora's Mask. On the complete opposite end of the spectrum, atmosphere can also take the form of a cozy and relaxing vibe. Animal Crossing is the series that immediately comes to mind, with its real-time clock system that encourages slow-paced gameplay full of quieter moments. One of the main reasons New Horizons felt somewhat lacking to me is because it lost some of that immersive atmosphere, focusing on player freedom and expression. You can terraform your entire island to be whatever you want, but that came at the expense of the usual small-town feeling of the past games. But I still have more positive memories of New Horizons than negative, and I'll always love the core gameplay loop of this series. A lot of people are put off by the busy work activities of Animal Crossing, but to me they've always felt like an essential part of the relaxing experience. I can only sit still in one place for so long, so the repetitive tasks let me spend time enjoying the moment while not having to focus too hard on any one thing. The gameplay pulls you into a sort of zen state while doing chores that's basically the entire appeal of the farm sim genre. What's really interesting to me though is when both the creepy and the cozy atmospheres combine into one strange mix of the two. The inside of the Deku tree from Ocarina of Time is eerie, haunting, and yet still somewhat relaxing at the same time. This sort of atmosphere is where I really have difficulty describing it, as it becomes something beyond a simple Zelda dungeon. As much as I adore Majora's Mask, it's the contrast of atmospheres in Ocarina of Time that hits the hardest for me personally. When a game has both the darkness of something like the Shadow Temple and the childlike wonder of Kokiri Forest, both are made so much stronger as a result. Castle Town is the perfect example, as it's the context of knowing what this town used to look like that makes its future form feel so haunting. 25 years later, and Ocarina of Time still has possibly the best collection of atmospheres from the whole series. Basically every dungeon in this game has such a rich sense of history, making playing through them feel like uncovering ancient secrets that have been lost to time. The Zelda series has so many fantastic dungeons, from the Arbiter's Grounds in Twilight Princess to the Ancient Cistern in Skyward Sword. While the new era of Zelda games immerses you with its massive open worlds and the freedom to explore them, the older games often focus on limiting you to one contained location, making these sections of the game really memorable. It can be hard to distinguish between atmosphere and music, as I would say the soundtrack makes up for more than 50% of an area's overall atmosphere. Music is already an important part of any game, but it's essential to creating a rich sense of immersion. Exploring an alien planet as a bounty hunter wouldn't feel nearly as engaging without Super Metroid's legendary soundtrack playing alongside you. Metroid is arguably the Nintendo series with the highest amount of atmosphere out of all of them, as nearly every single one of these games has a ton of memorable areas. Somehow all 3 Prime games manage to have totally unique locations that never feel too similar, whether it's the dark depths of Torvus Bog or the cloudy heights of Skytown Elysia. The Sanctuary Fortress has a particularly interesting aesthetic that stands out as one of the best areas from the series. Also from Prime 2, there's the harsh and oppressive exploration of the Dark World versions of every location. These sections of the game require you to focus exclusively on your survival, forcing you to pay attention to your surroundings if you want to live. The narratives of these games are usually pretty hands-off, requiring you to piece everything together yourself if you really want to understand it all. This adds to the immersion a lot, as diving into old records and reading descriptions of alien creatures really gets you in the mindset of Samus. One of the main focuses of Metroid is isolation, the feeling that you're completely alone in an entirely unfamiliar environment. You spend most of your time in the deep caves and tunnels of various planets, rarely ever seeing the surface. But it's overcoming all of these challenges and getting upgrades that makes the gameplay so satisfying by the end of the game. Going from a scared explorer just trying to survive to the most dangerous threat on the planet never gets old. And speaking of games centered around isolation, there's Pikmin. All 4 mainline Pikmin games are fantastic, but I don't think any of them have managed to recapture the special atmosphere that the first one had. Between the gameplay focused on recovering your ship parts and Olimar's ship logs, this game has a really strong story about a father trying to get off a hostile planet and make it back to his family. Pikmin has plenty of that contrast of dark and light elements I mentioned earlier, as the many different creatures you interact with can be either cute or terrifying. If you aren't in control of your Pikmin squad at all times, you'll have to watch your faithful companions be killed in front of you faster than you can say Bulborb. I think it's why Pikmin has struggled to find mainstream appeal for so long, as what seems like a cute and cozy game on the surface can quickly turn into a stressful survival game full of tense moments. And that's exactly what's so great about it. One of my favorite atmospheres from this series is the floaty ambience of the SS Drake from Pikmin 3. It's the perfect way to relax in between intense days of exploration. And while we're up here in space, I've got to talk about the game with the greatest space atmosphere of all time, Super Mario Galaxy. Mario games aren't typically known for their immersion, but Galaxy has always felt a little bit different. Of course, there's the tangible tropical layout of Isle Delfino, or the many different amazing kingdoms in Odyssey, but the most invested I've ever felt while playing a Mario game was while reading Rosalina's storybook. This simple retelling of her life story is emotionally powerful and recontextualizes the entire narrative. The Comet Observatory was already one of my favorite video game locations, but knowing it's a refuge for lost Lumas and a second home for a girl grieving the loss of her mother gives it so much more meaning. Galaxy captures the wonder of space in a really beautiful way, while also using its scale to tell a story that feels vast and important. I'm sure that nostalgia plays a big role, but this game still has an incredible sense of atmosphere that I'll always love. I've talked about the immaculate vibes of the Splatoon series a lot in the past, and the most recent addition to the series, Side Order, has some really great atmosphere as well. The way the environment reacts to the music with shapes appearing in the air around you is really cool, and the super clean and organized art direction kind of makes me wish Order would have won the final Splatfest of Splatoon 2. The Octo expansion still takes the crown for the most atmospheric Splatoon experience though, with the long winding tunnels of the deep sea metro being perfectly chill while still intimidating. This series being so focused on multiplayer gives it a totally different feeling than most of the other examples I've talked about so far, which have mostly been single player only. Splatoon feels like a living and breathing world that you're just a small part of. I'll always enjoy the party atmosphere of Splatfests, as it feels like the whole community comes together to celebrate and/or argue about Shiver's team winning too much. I try to play at least a few matches in every one of these events, as once they stop happening I find myself missing them. My first playthrough of Xenoblade Chronicles was like a non-stop sense of awe and wonder at the massive environments of the Bionis and the Mechonis. The scale of Xenoblade is really on another level, and the creative world design is consistently impressive. I have vivid memories of traveling through the inside of the Mechonis for the first time over winter break, specifically this giant door slowly opening above you. One of my favorite parts of these games is the way the locations transform at night into entirely different atmospheres, usually being calming and relaxing. The night versions of the music pull me into the world of Xenoblade even more than the high energy of the day themes, as I can easily imagine myself setting up camp under a tree and staring out at the landscape with the stars decorating the sky. Once again, it's the contrast of the atmospheres that makes each one so much stronger. I really enjoy the second and third games, but the many unique and distinct locations of the original continue to be the ones that stay in my mind the most. There are a lot of great examples of atmosphere in Nintendo games I didn't cover, but those are some of my favorites. Of course, there are also so many other non-Nintendo games I could talk about that relate to this topic, but I only have so much time to devote to one video. I find that I often have the most fun playing a video game when I slow down and really get immersed into the world around me, and take the time to really get familiar with the environments. Getting lost in a fictional world is one of those things that makes real life just a bit easier to handle for me, as being able to focus on something and spend time somewhere else for a while lets my brain stop worrying about every decision I have to make and all the possible outcomes of those choices. All of the truly great video games I've played have had this sense of immersive atmosphere, and it's what I really get excited for when looking forward to future releases. Whether you're returning to an old favorite or discovering something new, I highly recommend diving into a few different games and spending a couple hours enjoying the unique atmospheres they have.